First off, I want to welcome you all to tonight's edition of Thursday Night Live, uncovering bioluminescent fungi. It's going to be led by our speaker tonight, Matt Schink, who's an environmental educator here at the Schuylkill Center. So before I start, I just want to begin with a couple of slides. So this event is going to be recorded and uploaded to the center's YouTube channel. We ask you to keep your microphone on mute while listening, and please turn off your video if you do not want to be visible. So since we're going to be screen sharing today during the presentation, use the side-by-side view to see both the speaker and the slides. And during the talk, please feel free to put in any questions in the chat. It's highly encouraged, and we're going to get to all of them at the very end. So the Schuylkill Center's 365 acres are located in Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral lands of the Lenape people, whose presence and resilience continue to this day in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, as well as in the Turtle Island diaspora. We honor the original caretakers of this land and recognize the difficult history that has brought us here. And moving forward, we seek to establish meaningful partnerships with the Lenape community. So part of those 365 acres of land are 4 miles of our trails, and they're kept in pristine conditions because of our amazing land and facilities team here at the Schuylkill Center. And as spring comes, this is a great opportunity for you all to come out here and enjoy some hikes and some walks on our trails. So our mission and goal here at the Schuylkill Center is to endorse environmental education. And we do a lot of things, and we endorse it through a couple of ways, one of which is our nature preschool. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for these kids. They have their preschool outside every day. They establish meaningful connections with nature. It's just a beautiful opportunity. They're having fun and they're learning at the same time, and it's always a beautiful day for these kids. We also have Camp Schuylkill. It's very popular at the Schuylkill Center. We do have a couple of spots available, so if you're interested, please head on over to our website. We have a new camp manager this year, and she's so excited to just start all these new activities with the kids, and it's an amazing time, so please come and join us. And if you enjoy art, we also have an art exhibit always up. And right now it's called Walking the Edge, and it's here throughout till April 1st. So come and check it out. It's really beautiful. We also have a new director of environmental art, Christina Murray, and she's worked so hard, and so have the artists, and it's a beautiful exhibit. So please come on and check it out. And people are always asking for volunteer opportunities here at the center, and lucky for you, we always have them all year long. If you like working on restoration work days, we have that on Saturdays. We also have opportunities at our wildlife clinic. We have a lot, so please check it out on our website. Another way to get involved is to become a member, so please join. Our members receive discounts on programs and the gift shop. They also receive advance notice on exclusive programs, and you can just join online. And if you're already a member, then thank you so much. We truly value your membership. And also in exciting news, our executive director, Mike Wildbecker, has recently released his new book, Wild Philly. It's an amazing read, a beautiful cover, and it's available at our gift shop at the center. So if you want to come check it out and grab yourself an autographed copy, it's available. And finally, I want to introduce our final Thursday Night Live, which is going to happen next week, and it's going to be an environmental justice roundtable. We have some really amazing and strong speakers, and I know so many of you have been loyal Thursday Night Live participants, and I'm hoping to see you a lot there. But other than that, I want to hand this off to Matt. Matt, the stage is yours. Everyone, please welcome Matt Schink.
Hello. So tonight I'd like to talk to you about bioluminescent fungi and just sort of give you an idea of how prevalent it might be. And just where you can find it. So I'm going to start off with what is a bioluminescence. And bioluminescence is a chemical reaction that occurs within a living organism that produces light as a byproduct of that reaction. And typically it's an oxygen-dependent reaction between chemicals that are called luciferins and luciferases. The luciferin is the generic term for the compounds that are actually producing the light, and the luciferase is the enzyme that catalyzes the reaction between the luciferin and the oxygen. It's independently evolved over 40 times in nature, with most using unique chemical pathways. So we'll use different actual chemicals for its luciferins and luciferases that mix together. So the process that makes fireflies glow is going to use a different chemical compound than what makes bacteria glow, and that uses a different compound than what makes fungi glow. And so here we see several different examples of bioluminescent organisms. Starting in the upper left-hand corner, we have something that's probably quite familiar to a lot of you, fireflies. And then on the right side, we have at the top, we have the bioluminescent algae, the sort of thing that you'll see in like a bay with the waves crashing, and you move your hand through the water and it causes it to glow. That's all this little algae. And then in the lower left-hand corner, we have what we're here for, the bioluminescent fungi. And then in the lower right-hand corner, we have this marine bacteria that glows a very pretty blue. And that's not something that you'll typically find visible in nature. It lives in squids, so you usually won't see that one. So I'd like to sort of just define and separate bioluminescence from fluorescence, because oftentimes when I'm talking about the glow-in-the-dark mushrooms, sometimes people will confuse that for mushrooms that glow when you shine a black light on them, and that's actually fluorescence. So bioluminescence is when the organism is producing its own light through a chemical reaction, and that is a form of active light emission. So the organism is actively producing its own light. Whereas in biofluorescence, it's absorbing one wavelength of light and re-emitting it at a different wavelength. So like a blacklight poster or shining a blacklight on highlighter to make it glow, that sort of thing. So it's taking UV light and re-emitting it at a brighter, more visible wavelength. And that's a reactive light emission. So it needs an external light source in order for you to see the glow. And that's not really what I focus on. I focus more on the bioluminescence, the ones that are always glowing on their own. In this picture, in this slide, we can see an example of the difference between the bioluminescent mushroom on the left and a fluorescent mushroom on the right. The bioluminescent mushroom is constantly glowing, and this rusula here on the right, I had to shine a black light on it, and you can see a little bit of the purple from the black light, and some of the gills are actually fluorescing a really pretty purple, but the cap of the mushroom is fluorescing this really cool yellow-green. But I like things where you can actually go out in the woods and see it without having to lug another flashlight around. And so bioluminescence has been observed in over 100 different species of fungi in several different genera. It occurs in several different lineages, but most prominently in the Mycelium. It's just a group of cute little mushrooms that some of them glow, some of them don't. They all use distinct but similar pathways. So they all have very similar chemicals that make them glow, but not exactly the same. And unlike transient bioluminescent organisms like fireflies, the mushrooms are constantly giving off light. So they're giving off light in the daytime, and they're giving off light in the nighttime. all the time, 24/7. There isn't any real change. It might fluctuate a little bit depending on the mushroom. And all currently known bioluminescent fungi produce mushrooms, but it's not always the mushrooms themselves that glow. So sometimes it will only be the mycelium, and sometimes it'll only be the mushroom, sometimes it's both. The exact reason why the mushrooms glow, we don't really know. There are some theories that maybe it's to attract insects to come and eat the spores and then spread them elsewhere. And there's another theory, which I subscribe a little bit more to, that it might just be a byproduct of the mushroom's metabolism, where it's trying to produce one chemical and it accidentally produces the one that glows in the dark. So I use two different methods to find bioluminescent fungi. The first one is to hunt for them during the day, and then bringing back what you find and going to a dark closet or just a really dark room and seeing if anything that you found glows. There's another method where you can just go into the woods at night in the dark and just look around for the glow. And that can be really fun. Both methods have their positives and negatives. And if you're trying to take pictures of them, it's usually good to use a mix. So if you want really good close-up pictures, you'll go out and find the specimens and bring them home to a controlled environment. Or if you're trying to take pictures of them in their environment, you're going to want to go out at night and find them and sort of get all situated. So hunting for them during the day is a lot easier than at night. It's a lot safer, but you need to know the actual identity of what you're looking for. So as long as you know the mushroom that you're looking for and can recognize it in the daylight, you're going to have good success. But you do need to have a general idea of what it is that you're looking for. One of the downsides is that your mushrooms might dry out, they might lose the glow on the way home, but you can note where you found them and go back at night. And using this method, you might miss a lot of the mushrooms. Like some mushrooms only make the wood itself glow, and you aren't really going to see that in the daytime unless you know what you're looking for. And nighttime hunting is my favorite. It offers a much more unique experience where you're just in this dark forest looking around and seeing all of these little fantastic, mystical, fairy-like glowing things all around you. And it's really a unique experience. But it can be difficult because there's low light, so you're going to be kind of stumbling around and you might trip a few times. There's wild animals sometimes that most of what I ran into were deer and a few possums. Nice friendly things. But you want to bring a low level of light just so that you can see your way around. Something like a flashlight with a red filter on it. I used a kerosene lantern with the flame turned all the way down. And that's just to keep your night vision. Um, Anything too bright, like a cell phone screen, is going to absolutely wreck your night vision, and then you won't be able to see the glow. And you're going to be much more likely to trip over things. So one of the cool things about this is that you can see things that you can't really bring home. So you'll see things like well, not the whole log, but whole huge chunks of wood on a log will be glowing, parts of trees. You can see in this picture here, there's several downed trees where just the base is glowing. You can't really drag that back to your house and look at it, and you wouldn't want to. You'd like to leave it there. And so that's one of the benefits of looking for it at night. And you'll definitely see things that you wouldn't have seen during the day. This is another picture of some of the logs that are just glowing. And this gives you an idea of just how prevalent it is, because these are all different logs, where they fell. And you can see at the base here, the mushroom has eaten away at the wood. and it's causing the wood itself to glow. And it's about every 10 feet. So these mushrooms are everywhere in the forest, and you can just go out there and find them. So the first one that I want to talk about, and this is all over the place at the Schuylkill Center, again, about every 10, 20 feet. This is Armillaria, or the honey mushroom. And the most visible evidence of this mushroom that you're going to see are going to be these things up here in the upper left-hand corner. These are called rhizomorphs. And this is just the mushroom's way of digging through the soil and looking for things to eat. And you can see some here on the right that are growing on a petri dish. And then we have a little bit of a glowing thing, a little root down here in the left-hand corner. And all of these slides, I think I have some close-up. So this is what the Armillaria looks like in nature. This is Armillaria gallica. There's several Armillaria species, but you can see up above this mushroom in the wood there, that dark color. That's all the mushroom's mycelium that has gone through, broken down the wood, and formed a sheet of melanin. And that's to protect the exposed mycelium from the sunlight. And that's why I suspect that it might be a metabolism thing, because the chemical process that makes melanin in the mushroom also accidentally or also follows the same pathway as the chemicals that produce the bioluminescence. So I have a theory that these mushrooms are producing the bioluminescence accidentally while trying to make the melanin to protect from sunlight. And so this is an example of one of the trees that you can see snapped in a storm, and the wood that's inside of it is brightly glowing. Another example, this one's a little bit older, so it doesn't have as much wood that's glowing. But you can see just lots of little speckles of glow in the wood. And some of these were really quite bright. And this particular one, and the other one before actually, had an anthill. So there were a lot of ants that were crawling all over them. Which, I don't think the ants were there because of the bioluminescence. I just think ants really like dead wood. But that definitely caused a surprise one night when I was in the dark, reaching into the wood and got covered in ants. I really like this one. It really gives a good example of just how deep into the wood the bioluminescent mycelium goes. And the fungal threads are so small that you can't really see them. And so you wouldn't know that it was there without the glow. It would just be a random piece of rotting wood. But here it is, glowing in the forest, and just creating a completely magical experience. And then another example, kind of showing the same thing. And in this one, you can sort of start to see some of the black rhizomorphs that I mentioned earlier that are kind of blocking the light here in the middle. But they go throughout the wood and spread out from the wood, and this goes down deep into the root system. All of these are at the base of the trees where they snapped, and it will actually infect the roots. You go through the soil, and those rhizomorphs will go out for hundreds of feet all around, and they will stay glowing in underground. And they'll find other pieces of wood that are nearby and start to infect that. They'll find other roots underground and start to grow into that to infect new trees and grow up. And that's why a lot of people don't like Armillaria, because they see it as a plant pathogen, which it is. It will infect living trees and dead trees. This is a good example of the sort of context that it's in. You can see this was just sitting on a little knoll down in the forest. And this one was incredibly bright. I think you could probably almost read by this one. And you can see it's lighting up the leaves around it. I could see this one from like 20 feet away. And it's just a really good example of how bright it can be. This one was really cool. So I collected up some of the glowing wood and sort of set it up to look like a campfire. And as I was doing this, a firefly, you can see here on the left, came in to come down and check it out, which I thought was really interesting because fireflies respond to the glow of other fireflies, and they respond to specific patterns that are blinking. And the fungus only just glows solidly. There's no blinking. But the firefly came down in, and you can see here, so these are all long exposures, so this was a 10-second exposure. So in that 10 seconds, this firefly flew in and then landed and sort of crawled around for a bit, checking out the wood. And I thought that was incredibly fascinating, and it was amazing to watch happen. But it was just a really nice mashing together of two different types of bioluminescence happening in the forest. And so, as I was saying earlier, the Armillaria infects root systems and spreads out through the soil with this Rhizomorphs. And in this case, I was trying to set up to photograph another mushroom later that night, and I accidentally tripped on a root. And when I came back at night to take pictures of the other mushrooms, I noticed that that root was glowing. So I decided that I was going to dig around the root and see how far down the glow went. And you can see here on the right, on this tree, these are the mushrooms that I was trying to take a picture of. They're Panellus stipticus. They're also bioluminescent. And so you can see just how close a lot of these mushrooms grow. They're just everywhere. Two totally unrelated glowing mushrooms, and they're both inhabiting the same tree system. And so when I dug around this root and came back later at night, I found that about a 4-foot section of this whole root was glowing in the dark. This is a closer version of the Rhizomorphs, and this is growing on the agar. And you can see the dark melanin patches that are forming on this white fluffy stuff that's called mycelium. And down along here, you see the darkness, that's all melanin. And that's what causes the Rhizomorphs to be this black color in the forest. And in this picture, you can see how along those Rhizomorphs and into the mycelium, this thing is glowing. And Armillaria is interesting, where it'll only glow really if it's been disturbed or when it's really, really fresh. Otherwise, it may glow dimly or not at all. So you might not necessarily see a tree infected with Armillaria glowing, but if you go out after a storm, after it's been really windy and things have fallen over or gotten knocked down, or something has come through and kicked it, then you'll find it glowing, which I think is very interesting. Other mushrooms will just glow. This is what the Rhizomorphs look like on logs. They grow up in between the bark, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably seen this in the forest and thought maybe it was like a weird root or a vine or something, but it's all the mycelial structure of this fungus. And this is the one that puts out the honey mushrooms. And yeah, this is a very good indicator that the wood that you see this on very likely glows in the dark, or at least parts of it do. Sometimes the Rhizomorphs themselves will glow, but I haven't really seen the ones that are high up exposed to the air on the trees glowing. It's usually the ones that I've found buried underground. So here you can see one of the ones that I've dug up. This was a really, really tiny guy, and it's glowing. A little bit closer example. And these are just really weird glowing things. The first ones that I found were when I was clearing out some leaves in the forest. And when I came back at night, I saw what looked like little strings of Christmas lights in this pile of leaves. And when I looked closer, I realized that it was the Rhizomorphs and that they were glowing. Up until that point, I hadn't heard anybody, none of my mycologist friends, talking about the actual Rhizomorphs themselves glowing, only the glowing wood. So this is the second most common species that you're likely to see. And this also grows pretty predominantly at the Schuylkill Center. It really likes down along the Ravine Loop Trail, but there's some up by some of the ponds and by bird blind, and it's just everywhere. But it's kind of small. Yeah, they're between the size of a dime and a nickel or a quarter usually, and they grow in all these little clusters, and they're really cute. I like them. So this was the one that I was trying to photograph when I tripped over that other route. And when I came back at night, I actually found that these ones, for whatever reason, didn't glow. So sometimes there's like a genetic mutation where mushrooms that almost always glow, a certain cluster, a certain community of them won't glow. But I did find when I came back and photographed them at night that this tiny, tiny little piece, just the tiniest little piece was glowing, but the rest of the colony was not. And that was very interesting. But this is what you're more likely to see when you find the Panellus stipticus, is the entire cluster of mushrooms is glowing. Sometimes really bright, sometimes it'll be pretty dim. They glow the brightest after a good rain. So the best time to look for bioluminescent mushrooms is in early to midsummer for the armillaria after a good heavy rain, and throughout the summer for the Panellus stipticus. And the Panellus stipticus seems to pop out after like a cold streak. So when you have cold rain and then followed by nice warm weather. This is a close-up of some of the young Panellus stipticus before it has fully opened up. You can see that the glow tends to center itself along the gills, that the gills are glowing the brightest, but the entire mushroom actually glows. And as it ages and grows up, the glow kind of dims throughout the rest of the mushroom, and the gills stay glowing pretty brightly. And this is one of my favorite mushrooms. It was the first bioluminescent mushroom that I ever found, and I've found it hundreds of thousands of times since. And so when we're trying to find it, most often I will find it on logs that have fallen down onto the ground, little sticks. They're down along the ground, and it'll grow on both hardwoods and occasionally conifers. I found it's really partial to musclewood, and anywhere near a stream, it likes that. Sometimes you can find it on larger logs or actual stumps, but you usually won't find it growing up above like eye level. So it's usually pretty close to the ground and someplace that it's pretty easy to see. And this picture was very interesting, and I didn't notice this until I came back and was processing this picture. But you can see here, underneath the mushroom, you actually see that some of the leaves are glowing. And that's either a completely different fungus that's growing on those leaves that's glowing, or it's also possibly from spores falling off from these mushrooms onto the leaves, germinating and starting to grow. As you can see, it got pretty widespread throughout this little pile of leaves. So you can find glowing leaves too, where the mycelium is eating them. But there are a number of different species of mushroom that can do that, usually in the Mycena genus. So the third most common species, and I haven't seen this at the Schuylkill Center at all, but I'm sure it's probably there. This is called Omphaliotis illudens. Its common name is the jack-o'-lantern because it's bright and vivid orange and it glows in the dark and it's all spooky. So this one's more of a late summer fall mushroom. as opposed to earlier in the season. And it can sometimes be confused for the edible chanterelle, but this is what it looks like when it's glowing. You notice again the gills are glowing the brightest. And I like these ones because they're really big mushrooms compared to the little tiny Panellus stipticus. So you can get a really good idea of just what's going on. And they're really pretty. And they can grow in these huge clusters as well. Lots of mushrooms. These ones were actually found, I want to say, at Fort Washington. And this was the first time that I had found this many glowing mushrooms. I just had this huge pile of mushrooms that were glowing. And it was just a really fun experience. Oh, and they will all be decomposers. They'll all be growing on dead wood. There's no mycorrhizal or parasitic bioluminescent mushrooms. So they'll all be pretty easy to find. Any place that there's fallen wood, dead decomposing wood, you'll be able to find them. So I also tried to experiment with using some of this bioluminescence as a lighting source, but it ended up being really dim. But I thought that would be fun to sort of experiment with these natural light sources. I spent a lot of time growing it out onto these agar plates and just expanding the culture, playing around with it, seeing what I could do. And I ended up growing it on these square panels. So this is the mycelium of Panellus stipticus, that little cluster of tan mushrooms. And I actually cultured this one from the wild in my backyard. And it was one of the brightest glowing mushrooms that I'd seen. And I built that into a panel that could be used for lighting. And I illuminated a bunch of different things. This one I thought was funny because it's a jack-o'-lantern, that nice bright orange mushroom. And it would have been funnier if I could have actually gotten it to glow from the mycelium of the omphallotus, the jack-o'-lantern, but I didn't have any of that at the time. And I thought this was just a funny play on words. This is also the mycelium of the Panellus stipticus that I just sort of piled up in a jack-o'-lantern and took a picture of it. In this one, you can see I've got the petri dishes with the mycelium growing and a couple of jars with birdseed that the fungus is growing on, just illuminating this book, The Mushroom at the End of the World. I thought that was fitting. It was just to see what sort of things I could light up. No matter how much stuff I got together, I never actually had enough light to truly read by, so it never really panned out. And this one's just a funny picture of a cat, illuminated by the mushrooms. Because I wanted to try lighting different things, living creatures, just to see if what I could do with it. But this was like a 2 or 3 minute exposure, and cats don't really like to sit still, so it's all sorts of blurry. But she was a good cat. Now I tried to put it into a lantern, initially so that I could see, but it just wasn't bright enough to do that. So a lot of it just ended up being used for these artistic photo shoots. And you can see here also, we got another little firefly, just sort of photo bombing us. So that's it for the mushrooms. But I also like to talk about some other things that glow in the dark that we might occasionally see. These ones we won't see much because they're the bacteria. But I've seen that people can culture these from fish, from a fish market and that sort of thing. But they're just really cool organisms that can be easily grown. And I think are a really good example, a really tangible example of bioluminescence. And so this is the marine bacteria Vibrio fischeri, and it's widespread in the ocean, so you'll find it anywhere there's seawater, basically. Both free floating, so it's just floating in the ocean, and specifically as a symbiont in the light organs of cephalopods, so like squids, octopi, things like that that glow in the dark. And so the squids will have these little, they're called photopores, and they're just these little tiny, tiny microscopic holes that a colony of bacteria will live in. And the squid can sort of modify how much light comes out, and the squid can control it. And it offers counter illumination. So the squid can match the light coming out of its photopores to the light coming down to the ocean above. And it can camouflage itself from predators or prey that are down below it. So when they're looking up, all they see is sky or ocean sky, whatever you would call it. So yeah, it's really cool. And that's why it's got this really nice blue, beautiful blue, sky blue color. And it only glows in a high density of population. So when it's all spread out, when it's spread out in the ocean, you don't really see it glowing. But when they come together close enough, some sort of signaling happens and the entire colony starts to glow. And so it's used as a model organism for quorum sensing. This was how quorum sensing was discovered. And quorum sensing is just that it's a signal from one organism to another that says, hey, there's enough of us here, let's do something. So it happens in bacteria all the time for various different things. Insects do it. Basically just a way for colonies to talk to each other and do a single task. And it's really easy to grow. And it grows really fast. So I did the same thing. I grew it on a bunch of different petri dishes and created lighting panels. And it's a lot brighter than the Panellus stipticus, than the fungus. So it's pretty fun to play around with, and it gives off this beautiful blue glow. So it's a lot easier to see. And it works really well in liquid culture. So you produce a culture medium, in this case, it's just seawater and fish food. Because I've realized that if it grows on squid and fish in the wild, you can get it to grow on fish in a jar. And when you have it in liquid culture like that, you can actually paint with it. And that's a really fun application because you can paint funny things like glow or pictures, and it's really fun. And I think that could be a good educational thing as well. And so here it is next to the bioluminescent fungus. And in this case, this was a really, really young fungus that was glowing really bright, and a really, really old dying colony of the bacteria. Because they're so mismatched in their light production that I had to get really weak bacteria and really strong fungi to be able to photograph them in the same shot. But it has this really nice contrast, I think, between the blue and the green. So this one, I think, is probably something that a lot of people are familiar with. This is the algae that glows in the dark. It's called Pyrocystis fusiformis. And I used to think that it was a diatom because it has a sort of diatomaceous shape, but it's a lot bigger than diatoms. This is a millimeter across. So these are actually big enough to see with the naked eye. And when they're floating in the seawater, like you can see on the right, they look like these little tiny glassy, glittery sparkles. And these are the ones that will glow when you move your hand through the water or when the waves are crashing against the shore. And they create this vibrant, really dark, rich, deep blue. But again, they only glow when they're disturbed. So this was an unhealthy culture that only had a few, and this is on a stir plate. So I turned it on and let the magnet spin, and only a few glowed. So I switched suppliers and got a sample from a different company, and they were a much healthier culture, much brighter glow, and this was more what I was expecting, this sort of magical glow when you shake the bottle or put it on a stir plate. And so if you'd like to go out and find your own fungi, and if you want to try to take pictures of them, this is the method that I usually use. So I have a Nikon 50mm lens with a 1.8 aperture. And so what that really low aperture does is it creates this huge amount of light that comes and hits the sensor. So you can pick up really low levels of light. And a long exposure, usually between 5 seconds and 3 minutes, depending on the settings on the camera. And a really high ISO, but that causes a lot more noise, which has to be dealt with in post. But high ISO also allows for shorter exposure times, shortening the amount of time that you have to spend in the dark woods, which is a nice thing. And I use extensive post-processing using AI software, Topaz Labs, which helps to reduce the noise and helps me to sharpen the images, and color and contrast adjustments in raw therapy. And so that's it for the mushrooms. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I hope that you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you so much, Matt, for that amazing presentation. And there are lots of questions in the chat, so I'm going to start reading some over to you. And if you guys have any more, please feel free to type them out. So Sarah wants to know if there are these types of mushrooms in the Philly area.
Absolutely. All three of these can be found in the Philly area. The Panellus stipticus is very common in almost any wooded lot, and as is the Armillaria. The Armillaria is everywhere, literally. You can find it on almost every patch of forest, but it's not always glowing. But the Panellus stipticus is pretty reliable in its glow.
Okay, thank you. And Brian's asking if this bioluminescence is always in that greenish light.
Yeah, so in fungi, it's always the same color, around this sort of 527 nanometer grain. Pretty uniform in fungi. In other organisms, like we saw, there can be blue, and some fireflies glow orange, but in fungi, it's always green.
Okay, great. And Deb is asking if this bioluminescence is visible all year round.
Not really. So it's going to be visible when the mushrooms are most active. And so during the spring and summer, when the mushrooms are fruiting, when the mycelium is growing, but when the mycelium dies back and the mushrooms die back over the winter, you won't see anything glowing then.
Okay, great. We have time for a couple more. So Rebecca wants to know if there are host microbe specificity seen with these fungi, like are malaria only infecting certain types of trees, or?
So I think with Armillaria, it's going to be most hardwoods. There might be some difference between different species, but there's several different species of Armillaria. And I guess I've probably never seen it on a conifer, but I have seen the Panellus stipticus on both hardwoods and conifers, though it seems to be I have a preference for hardwoods.
Okay, great. Well, I'm gonna ask you one more, and it's from Brian. So does this bioluminescence take much energy to produce light all the time?
I think that's an excellent question and not one that I think anybody has really studied in great detail. Because it does seem like it would be taxing for the organism to waste all this energy to produce light, which is why people think that it must happen for a reason.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Matt. I'm seeing one last message from Sarah about if the Schuylkill Center and Matt would ever consider doing a walk for us to look for bioluminescent fungi. We're actually having a forest stargazing walk coming up next week, and Matt is going to join us, and we're going to do stargazing, but on the way there, we are going to look out for bioluminescent fungi. We might see them, we might not, but it's a great opportunity. So yeah, you can check that out. He's going to be there as well. I think that's all the time we have for tonight. So I want to extend a big thank you for Matt for spending his evening and giving us a talk about the bioluminescent fungi. And thank you all for coming out here and joining us for Thursday Night Live. And I hope to see you all next week at our final one. So as you leave, if you want to unmute really quick and give Matt a quick goodbye and thank you, feel free to do so. But thank you all. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Was great, Matt. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Love you.
Thank you very, very much.
Matt, that was so awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you real soon. Thank you, Zaina. All right. Good night, everybody.